And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 44. To all your listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a photographer, podcaster, and small business owner based here in Port Macquarie, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. This week's episode, we're going to be talking all about equipment and the equipment that I have and how I think that equipment plays a role in your art and being able to create the work that you do, and when is it that you get to a stage where you feel like you need to upgrade equipment or you need to change your equipment. We're going to be talking all about that sort of stuff today. But before we do that, let me talk about what has been going on for me this past week. And for me, really, as I spoke about in last week's episode, I really had about 2 weeks off before recording that episode and had a bit of time away from work as I was moving home. I was moving house, so just having relocated to Port Macquarie, had a few weeks off from work, and so all this week has been really about answering emails and updating things as well. Had a few new inquiries this week, which was really nice, and being able to answer a few things and trying to organize a lot of things. It's been very hard as I've moved now where my business is, so I've had to sort of reschedule a lot of things that I would have previously had, and so rescheduling those, emailing a lot of people with that type of new stuff. But also I think the other part of it was really updating my website, and that was something that I knew was going to have to happen, and it was nice to sort of reevaluate where that was at and go back in and have a look at some of the things that I haven't actually tweaked in a little while and change some of the wording and really go back in and sort of fine tune all those sort of things that you don't really tend to think about. You tend to sort of set and forget those types of things. So it was nice to get back in there and get a bit of that stuff updated into the new location that we are in at the moment. I also just wanted to take a bit of a moment to speak on last week's episode. Now, if you guys have listened to last week's episode, you'll realize that the audio quality is really bad. I forgot to turn on the main microphone last week. It's on at the moment. I certainly hope so anyway. And so the audio quality is terrible. It's only coming through the camera. But I made a last minute decision to still release that episode. I was editing it and I thought that the actual content was a lot better than the audio quality itself. It's not about the audio quality, it's about the content. And so I thought the content was up to scratch, and I still decided to release that episode. And I've spoken about on this podcast before, definitely about trying to produce up to a certain standard, and then after that you need to move on. And for me, that episode was something that I needed to just produce and be able to have out there to move on to the next one. If I would have tried to re-record it, I don't know how I would have gone with that episode, and I really didn't want to throw it away. I was very glad that I still had the audio and had the ability to use the audio from on the camera. So that was something that I wanted to get out there, and I thought that I wouldn't let my perfectionism hold me back in that sense, because it has been something that has happened in the past, and so trying to overcome that hurdle. And it's a constant thing for me, and any creative people out there would know this, that trying to not be held back by that perfectionism, trying to not always create perfect work. And you're never going to be able to create perfect work. No one out there is perfect. So you're never going to get that standard if that's all you're aiming for. So for me, it's just about being able to put that work out there and get and really just move on with the next work, because I don't think I would have been able to produce it again had I have tried to re-record the episode. I heard something through the week on another podcast that I was listening to, and it was really interesting that I always tend to hear things around the types of things that I've been hearing. I think it's because my ear is attuned to hearing those specific types of things. But I heard something on a podcast this week that was saying that if you don't like your old work, you need to be able to get back out there and create more work to then bury your old work that you didn't like so much. So it's not about deleting the old work. It's not about not having it out there at all. And I'm a big believer in being able to put work out there that's not amazing, being able to put work out there that isn't 100% your best ever work, because I think that still is that process of creating. And if we're not going to ever release work that's not 100%, then we're never going to be releasing work. And so being able to put it out there, but then moving on with the next work and making sure that the next piece is even better and the next piece is even better, so that work becomes irrelevant, that it's so far down and hidden by other work that no one will ever know it's there, but it's still there for you in your memory and something for you to then look back on. So that was me with this podcast, and hoping to continue to be able to produce episodes, and that sort of drives me forward to know that being able to produce more episodes will make that work irrelevant in the future, and hopefully continue to improve on this podcast. Whilst we're on the topic of last week's episode, I just wanted to sort of wrap up a little bit that I was saying. I know that it was a bit of a shorter episode, but something that I still wanted to speak on. And really what it boiled down to for me was the fact that if I wouldn't do work for free, then why would I want to do it at all? And really, that's all that I've ever been wanting to do. I've been wanting to do work, and if I'm not going to do creative work that I would inherently do for free, I think that's why we all start in creative careers, because we really want to do the work and we really enjoy the work we do. So there would be no impact if we didn't get paid for that work, because we're happy to be able to do that work for free because we really enjoy it. So I'm trying to keep that mentality of only doing work that I would inherently do for free. And so along with that comes the question of, how do you then ask to charge for that work? How do you then put a price on that work when you would happily work for free? So that is really what I was trying to wrap up in saying, that I would never want to put myself in a position where I'm having to do work that I wouldn't inherently do for free. And that is my whole mentality about being in a creative business. It's my whole mentality about starting my own business and trying to do the work that I enjoy every single day, is not to do work that I don't enjoy to then charge for it. It's to do work that I enjoy and then hopefully charge for it in the future and hopefully earn a bit of money from that, because I enjoy it so much and I put so much into it and I really enjoy it and can see long term in it. So that was really what it came down to last week. And so I just wanted to wrap that a little bit up for all of you guys who may have listened to that episode, or if you didn't listen to that episode because the audio was really bad, if you got halfway through and turned it off, that was what it was really all about. And so trying to really be able to get your message out there, because I think it's something that a lot of people would like to hear, but a lot of people who are questioning whether they should start businesses and how they should start their own creative work in their own creative field, I think that is one thing to really keep in mind moving forward, because you're never going to be able to have that longevity in a career if you're not enjoying it, and if you're not only producing work you would do inherently for free. Then the other thing that I really want to jump into from the last week is that my 2022 calendars arrived through the week. So they arrived here on Monday, and so I've through this week had to get those all packaged up and sent off. It was really nice. It did actually take me quite a long time to get them all packaged up, but it was really nice to be able to get those sent out. I ordered them quite a while ago, and I've had the pre-orders, as I spoke about on this podcast, I had the pre-orders probably 6 weeks ago now. So from that journey of pre-ordering to actually ordering the physical calendars and having them arrive now and having them sent out, hopefully they will be there by the time this episode airs. So if you did order one, thank you very much for supporting that, and I hope you really do appreciate them. I was very glad with the way they turned out. I've spoken about last year's calendars on this podcast in the earlier episodes, and how I was a bit upset with the way that last year's turned out, and I had a few mistakes and a few errors in the ordering process of that one. There was a bit of a turnaround, a little bit of a delay as well, but these guys really came through. I went through a new supplier this year, and I was very happy with the quality, very happy with how they turned out, and I'm overall really pleased to have been able to get these out in a year that was a bit hindered by us being in lockdown and everything like that. So I was able to produce these calendars and actually have them for sale during lockdown, which was really nice for me and really gave me something to work on, but also glad that I was able to get that out there when I didn't have a large amount of images to draw from, over only being out there, being able to take photos for probably only 6 months of the year. So was really glad to be able to get that out there and streamline that process, and to know that I got so many orders and how long it actually took me to package all of those up really just showed me that how much support that I had around these, and how many of you guys were really behind it, and how many people had been supporting it even much more than last year. And so I'm very thankful for where this has grown, and I'm hoping to do more prints and more of my artwork, and have more of my artwork out there also into next year. So that's going to be really something that we're driving for, and I'm really grateful for everyone who has been supporting it. If you miss out on ordering or pre-ordering one of the calendars for this year, I did order a few more, so there'll be a few more up for sale probably the end of this week, if not next week. So I'm going to be releasing a couple more. There's not very many left. I think there's only about 10 left. So I'm going to be able to have those out and available for sale next week if you didn't manage to pre-order one. I know there were a few of you who were messaging me after the pre-order to see if you could still get one, so they will be available next week if you guys are interested. And I will talk through that whole process as I normally do on the podcast, about how I sort of go about that and how I go about the sale after the pre-sale. So we're going to be speaking all about that and seeing at the end how I've actually wrapped up in being able to sell all these calendars, and how I've worked out how much money I've made from them. As I spoke about last year's, I didn't earn any money from them. I know I've made a whole episode on that one. I'm going to make a whole episode on this one and see how a few of the changes that I implemented this year, how they've actually helped me or hindered me in that sort of way. So do stick around for that episode. And then the last thing that I really want to touch on is something that my fiance Emily asked me through the week. And she asked me a question of whether I was happy with where the podcast is, or whether I was happy with how the podcast is growing, because I think she's been able to see that there has been a little bit of growth on the podcast. I don't really speak about it too much in my own personal life, but I think that she's been able to see that there has been some growth in it. And she was asking me how I have experienced that, and really if I was happy with where it's grown to. And for me, it was a little bit of a strange question, because initially starting the podcast, it was never something that I was aiming for growth. It was never something that I was trying to do to be able to grow a really big podcast or grow heaps of people tuning in every week. That was never the aim, but it's always great to be able to hear a lot of actual people tuning in each week, and that's really nice. But it was always the aim for me, and the aim of this podcast was to be able to get my journey out there and get my story out there. I think more so for me, I think I really wanted it as a way to document the journey for me. And I look back at the end of 2020 and thought that I didn't really have anything documenting the start of my business. So I started my business in early 2020, and I didn't really have anything to document that whole stage through starting that business. And I thought that it would be great to have something to look back on in a few years' time, and something to really be able to keep me accountable, to keep track of where I was at that stage. And I thought about a whole range of things that I could do, and it ended up being that I was going to start a podcast, and that was one of the ways that I wanted to be able to sit down here and record. And it was more sort of an audio journal for me, being able to explain everything that I've been working on for the past week, but also talking about a few of the things that I think are important and a few of the things that I think would be able to help other people. And I think that was always the aim for me, to be able to record it as in something that I would have really appreciated when I was starting my business, or where I am now. If I was to look back on this in a few years' time, if I was looking back as someone who is just starting their business, I think I would really appreciate this. And that was always something that I wanted to do, was be able to target other people exactly like me in those positions. So to hear that anyone else would tune into this podcast and be actually gaining things from that, that's amazing for me to hear, because it shows me that we're heading in the right direction. It shows me that I'm making the growth that I really want to be making. I really want to be able to help other people. I want my story to be able to help other people, and I want to be able to share things that I've learnt along the journey. This journey is not in isolation. There are other people out there who've been on it before, and I've always been a strong believer in the fact that you need to be able to learn off as many different people as you possibly can. If you want to try to start your own journey alone, and you want to try and work out everything by yourself, then that is great, but it'll probably take you a lot longer than if you were just able to sit down and hear someone and hear other people's journeys who have actually been through and already done that before. There's no point trying to reinvent the wheel here. This has already been done before. So being able to hear from other people who've already gone through those things just helps you. I think it helps you move forward in your business as well, and move forward in your creative career, and move on to new things, and being able to experiment in that creativity. There's no point getting sort of bogged down on other things that other people have already done before. So if I can share any of that, if I can help anyone out there, then that is really amazing. It's been really nice. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been getting a few messages from new people who've actually been listening to the podcast. And these are people who I don't actually know in real life. There's a fair few people who listen to this podcast who I've never met in real life. And that's very inspiring. I think at the start, it was mostly just friends and family who listen to the podcast. And I know that there are a lot of them who do tune in, which is great. It means that I don't really need to explain everything that's happening in my life to them if they do tune into this podcast. So it does make things a little bit easier for me there on that front. But it's great to hear that other people would be interested in sort of my journey, and other people who I don't actually know. And I know that that's when the podcast is really starting to grow, when I'm hearing from people who I wouldn't have expected to hear from, when I'm hearing from brand new people who are saying they've just randomly discovered the podcast and have been really enjoying it. And that has been really nice. That's been really, really gratifying for me to be able to hear from that, because I knew that it would be able to help people. It's just about being able to have it in front of the right people and being able to get it out there to people who would be able to enjoy it and who would be able to learn from these types of things. So that's been really nice. And for me, I'm going to continue to be able to share my story and continue this podcast because I've been really enjoying it. And I think that it in itself is really one of the main things. And that for me, the fact that I'm enjoying it means that I need to continue on with it. And hopefully we'll continue on for a few years to come. And with that out of the way, I want to jump into the topic of today's podcast, which is all about equipment and the equipment that I have, but also whether I think equipment plays a role in your creativity, but also talking about when to upgrade equipment or when to get new equipment, or how you can sort of handle with all your equipment and that sort of stuff. And I think there's a lot of things to really unpack here, and I really wanted to make an episode about this. I spoke about it on the Q&A episode, which was episode 20. I spoke a little bit about my equipment, but I've had a few more questions since then from other people who would really like to know about all the equipment that I use as a photographer. But then I also really wanted to touch on the need for equipment and the upgrading of equipment and feeling like you need to get new equipment, because this is something that I deal with quite a bit, and I have these feelings of really thinking that I need to get new equipment in order to become a better photographer. So when does it get to that point where you do need to upgrade, and when does it get to a point where you don't really and it's just all in your head? So we're going to be touching on a few of those things today. And I really want to start with the fact that I personally don't think that equipment necessarily makes you an excellent artist. It's never going to be able to do the work for you. So you need to make sure that you've got all the things down pat. You know, equipment is only one loop in the chain of creativity. There's a lot of other things that do come along with being a creative person. So equipment will help you up to a point, but after which is that law of diminishing returns, where yes, you can get the next piece of equipment up. You can get one piece that's a bit better than the last piece, but is that extra thing, is that extra feature going to really improve your art drastically? Is it going to change it by that much? Probably not. You know, there are some cases, and I'll speak about a few of the cases in a little while, when I think that there are certainly reasons why you would need to upgrade, and there are certainly reasons why you would need specific equipment for a specific job. And I'm not talking about that type of stuff, but I think starting out, I think too many people confuse the fact that they need the best equipment in order to start, and that's 100% that's not the case, and I know that from experience. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that today, in the fact that I think that your creative drive and your creative vision is really one of the biggest parts and one of the biggest elements in you being a creative person. So it wouldn't matter what equipment you have. Really, if you're limited by the equipment that you have, then that can be a constraint that could help you be more creative in the work that you do. So making sure that you're able to have enough constraints on you to be able to produce creative work. I know for myself at the start, I was looking back at some old images this morning actually, and I was looking at how I was producing them, because I didn't have all the equipment. I didn't have the best equipment that I ever possibly had. So I had to learn a lot of your workarounds of that equipment, and I had to learn a lot of things that I could do with the equipment that I had. So I got to learn the equipment that I had a lot more than someone who had all the equipment and was able to just create the work that they exactly wanted to create. It was more a creative challenge to be able to work with the things that I had. So I think that's a very important part, and it helps to have that drive. If you don't have drive, you can have the best equipment in the world, but if you don't have drive and you don't have creative ideas, then it's never going to be able. You're never going to be able to bring those to fruition if you don't have the drive. If you don't have ideas, the equipment can't make the work for you. So I just really want to get that out there at the start and remind you guys that it's not always about the equipment, and you can produce quality work without the best equipment. And in that vein, I really want to speak about the first equipment that I had as a photographer. So I've been a photographer for about 3 years now, and the first camera that I ever had was a camera that I bought secondhand, actually, and it was a Nikon D7200, just with a kit lens on it. I got it secondhand on Gumtree about 3 years ago. A bit crazy. And I used that for probably the first 18 months in photography. I used that for quite a long time. And I only had that one lens. It was a 18 to 140, I think, on the lens there. Really not the greatest equipment ever, but I did actually produce quite a large variety of work that I would still consider to be okay. You know, as of today, I'd still consider the work that I made with that camera to be just as good, if not up there with the work that I'm producing right now. And that really stands to say that some of that work has been printed, some of that work has been ordered by other people, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. You really wouldn't, because the amount of time and effort that I put into making sure that those images were up to a good standard in the other things that I was able to do, in the creativity and the styles that I was trying to create, I think that really made the equipment obsolete, really. So for me, I really want to stress that point, that the first equipment that I ever had wasn't the best camera. They were certainly not the best lenses either, but I was still able to create good work because I had that drive and I had that ambition to get out there and create work, and I really wanted to make as much work as I possibly could. And I know for me at the start, it was all about trying to produce as much work as I possibly could in order to grow. And I sort of learnt the ins and outs of that camera, and I learnt everything that I could possibly do on that camera because it was all I had. And so I was using it every single day, and I was trying to create as much work and learn all the different things about it. So by the time that I was ready to upgrade, I knew that I was ready to upgrade. I wasn't just upgrading because I needed a better piece of equipment. There was actually a reason that I needed to then upgrade. And as I've said, I sold prints from that camera. So I sold prints of images that I took with that camera. So that is to say that the images were up to a good standard. The images were able to be printed. The images were of good standard. They were of good quality. There wasn't anything wrong with that. And so it's not always about having the best equipment. And I know that you can produce quality work because I don't think anyone else outside of yourself would know that equipment isn't up to... I don't think anyone else would know that equipment isn't the best equipment out there. So as long as the work you're producing is up to a standard, I think that is quite all right. I also started my photography business just on my laptop, in my lounge room. And that was never something that I had a home studio. I never had an office at that stage, really, So it was never something that I really had a big computer that I was working on. I had all these cameras. I was just starting from where I was and hoping to grow it as organically as I possibly could. There's no point being out there and trying to go and buy the most expensive equipment that you possibly can if you don't have any clients, if you don't have any work, if you don't have anything lined up, if you don't have any skills in that area. There's no point buying the best equipment that's not going to be able to give you skills, not going to be able to give you creativity, it's not going to be able to give you drive. You need all these things. You need to know what you're trying to do first before you go and upgrade to really new equipment. And I've always been someone who's been strong on that in making sure you don't start with the best equipment. I think people who start with the best equipment can often get complacent in the fact that they don't need to learn every single thing. And I think it's important to start with an old camera. It's important to learn all the basics and learn your way up, especially in any craft. If you're starting with the most expensive stuff, I think you're never going to learn as much as another person. And those skills can then really help you when you're in a scenario where things do go wrong, and you will be in a scenario where things go wrong. And I've definitely been in situations like that before where things go wrong, where the autofocus isn't working. So I need to know how to be able to get an image in focus without having the autofocus on. Or, it's all about being able to troubleshoot on the job and making sure that you have those skills. And I think that is one of the best ways to be able to produce those skills is to start off with equipment that may not be amazing, because you will learn your way around it. You'll learn every single bit about that equipment, and you will know probably more than most other people out there. With that said, let's move on to my gear list as it is today. And I'm probably not going to go through this in great detail because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people out there who won't be super interested in this stuff. But I'm going to talk about afterwards why I upgraded all my equipment and why each piece of equipment is important to me, because I think it's very important to be strategic about the equipment that we choose and make sure we're not just spending money because we have money. There's always things you can spend money on, but if you're just going to buy all the equipment in business, if you're going to spend all your money in business on equipment, then you're very quickly going to be out of business again, because you can't be spending all your money on equipment. We need to be strategic about the things that we spend money on, because there are other things in business that we need to be spending our money on as well. So at the moment, I'm using two cameras. I'm using the Nikon Z50 and the Nikon Z6. I've had the Z50 for, I think, about 18 months now, and I upgraded from the D7200 about that time. So that was the switch I made. And the Z50 is a crop-centered camera, which meant that I could bring all my old lenses over from my D7200 and use them on the Z50. Now, for all you folks out there who don't know what the difference is, so when you're talking about different types of cameras, you've either got a full frame censored camera or a crop censored camera. And so the only difference there is that the full frame camera has a sensor about the equivalent size to the old 35mm camera in the olden days, and the crop censored cameras have about a 23mm sensor along the long edge of the camera. So that just means that a crop sensor camera is a bit smaller. So the actual sensor on the camera isn't as large, so it's not going to be able to capture as much light. So you need to be able to increase the actual light in there a lot more, but it also means that we're able to produce the cameras a lot smaller. So the actual size of the camera can be a lot smaller. All your lenses don't have to be as wide either, because the sensor's only smaller. So therefore we can have smaller lenses on there as well, and therefore they're not as expensive. So that was what I started out with. I started out using a crop censored camera. And then my next upgrade was to the Nikon Z50, which was also a crop censored camera, which meant that I could use my other lenses on that crop censored camera. Which was really nice because I'd already upgraded a few of my lenses before that. So my lenses on the Z50, I've got the Sigma 10 to 20mm. I've also got the Sigma 18 to 35, and then I've got the Sigma 50 to 100mm. These all have different focal lengths to a full frame camera. So if we were to convert those into what they would be on a full frame camera, the 10 to 20mm is about a 16 to 30. The 18 to 35 is about a 28 to 50, and the 50 to 100 is about a 85 to 150. So we're talking there about extending the actual zoom on those all those lenses because they're on a crop sensitive camera. And if you didn't understand that, that's okay. But just wanted to be able to explain it to all those people who would know what I'm talking about. And then my other camera is a Nikon Z6, which is a full frame camera. Now, I got the full frame camera, my first full frame camera at the end of last year. So I've had that about 12 months now, and I've been really enjoying that. It's been really nice to have a full frame camera. And there were a few reasons why I did upgrade to that, and I'll let you know about that in a little bit. But the only lens I've got for that at the moment is the 35mm f1.8, which has been really nice to be able to have that sort of faster glass on that, which just means the f1.8 just means the aperture or the diameter of the lens is actually larger, which means it can let more light through, which means that I can really be able to take photos in sort of darker conditions that I wouldn't have been able to normally. And that was one of the big advantages to upgrading, and I really needed that in a fair few situations that I would be working in weddings and things like that, where I am in dark situations when I'm working in the night after the sun's gone down. I can still take photos, and that's really nice. So being able to have that sort of equipment is really one of the nice reasons to be able to upgrade. Then I really want to talk about my drone as well. So the drone I've got at the moment is the DJI Mini 2. I got this drone back in June, and the drone itself only costs about $700, I think. And I really wanted to just experiment in drone photography. I really haven't done drone photography before, but I've really enjoyed it ever since I did purchase that drone, and I think I will upgrade that eventually. But I'll speak about that as well. But that really for me was just a way to be able to get into drone photography, and it's been really helping me to be able to create some really nice images there as well. Here on the podcast, the microphone that I've got is the Rode NT USB microphone, which I had at home ever since I started this podcast. I've had this microphone for probably 3 years now, and it was just lying around at home. I think you can pick one up for about $200. It's a really good microphone. It's all you'd ever need, really. It just plugs into the computer via USB, and that's really nice for me. I don't have to have a big audio stage here. I can just have that straight into the computer and use it ready to go. I also picked up a new Audio Technica microphone as well. It was about $150. Just wanted to have an extra microphone so that I could do interviews in person, and hopefully we'll have some more interview episodes, some more guest episodes up soon. So that has been really nice, and being able to have another microphone to be able to use in person is really good as well, because if I'm interviewing someone, I can't just always use the one microphone. In terms of my computer and the editing software that I've got the full Adobe Creative Suite, which means that I've got all the editing software that I really need for all my different types of things. So for editing my photos, I use Lightroom and Photoshop a lot. They're really the apps that I use almost every day. They're almost open on my computer all the time. So it's really handy to have both of those in the suite there, and be able to use those for all my images, whether that be sorting through my catalogs for my wedding photography, and then also my landscape photography as well, I use those in Photoshop a lot more as well, and being able to edit those photos to a higher standard in there. I also use Premiere Pro for my videos, so that this podcast is recorded. So then I'll import that into Premiere Pro and export that for onto YouTube, and any other videos I do for my weddings or any other sort of promotional stuff when I'm creating Instagram Reels as well. Often I do those in Premiere because it's just easier for me when I'm here at home. And then I use Adobe Audition for my podcast, so I can edit the audio from the podcast in Adobe Audition, and that's really nice to have that all sort of in that one workflow where I can transfer between Adobe Audition and Premiere Pro, the audio, and go back to the video as well. And then just a little bit more of the specifics. For my landscape photography, I obviously have a tripod. I have a fair few ND filters as well that I've been using. I've been using the ND filters from Earth for the past few years, and they've been really nice. Been really enjoying those ones. I think for me, I had to get the professional ones, the ones on the ground, the really sort of cheap ones that they have. They're really starting to make all my images kind of green. So if you don't know what an ND filter is, an ND filter is kind of like a pair of sunglasses for on your camera. And so I would put that over the front of the camera in order to be able to make it darker, so I can shoot for your long exposure photography as well. So the older ND filters that I had were starting to give that sort of green cast over my images, and I didn't really enjoy that. But as I've upgraded to the ones that are supposedly of high quality, I've been really enjoying them, and they've been really nice so far. And then for my wedding photography and event photography, I've got a couple of flashes with the Magmod spheres on them that just diffuses the light from the flash and really gives it that really nice look. I also have a few light stands as well with the soft boxes on them if I need to have an off-camera flash for anything, any sort of event photography, any sort of commercial photography as well. It's really nice to have an off-camera flash, so have that as well. So I've got all that sort of range of stuff that I've really needed to upgrade to in the past few years as I transition into that sort of event and wedding photography. And so with all of that talk about my equipment out of the way, I want to jump into some of the reasons why I think you should upgrade and some of the reasons why I think you need to invest in new equipment. But first off, I want to talk about a thing that I do quite often, and that is renting equipment when you don't need to buy it. And for me, this often comes about with my photography, where I'm trying a new style of photography, when I'm trying to do work for a client that needs a very specific type of work. I'm not going to go out there and buy, especially when that equipment can be very expensive, I'm not going to go out there and buy that one piece of equipment just for this one time if I'm not sure that I'm ever going to use it again. So it's often cheaper to go and rent a piece of equipment than actually go and buy a piece. And I would always recommend that when you're first starting as well. I've actually gone and rented some of the cameras that I've wanted to buy in the past just to try them out, and some of the lenses as well, just to try them out before I actually go and buy them and see if I would actually use them, because it can often be a case that it doesn't really work within your style, and any piece of equipment can be like that, where it doesn't work in your style, but you wouldn't know unless you tried it. So it's nice to be able to go and have that hands-on experience and be able to try new equipment. There's often been occasions where I've needed a very specific piece of equipment that I know I would never use again, and there's no point going and buying that, and there's no point spending money on something you don't need to spend money on. But I will say it's important to be able to go and rent equipment when you know you need that specific piece of equipment. There isn't anything worse than turning up to an event, turning up to a professional shoot, or turning up to anything without the right equipment. So making sure that you have the piece of equipment specific for those needs of the job. So you need to be able to understand what piece of equipment you will need. There are specific occasions where I will need a really long zoom lens that I don't have. I don't need that every single day. I don't do a lot of long zoom photography. So I'm not in an industry that I need that sort of stuff. So if I'm on a shoot where I know I will need one, I'll just go and hire one. I'll go and rent one for the day, because there's no point in me buying that when I won't need it. But if I didn't have it, it would be something that I wouldn't be able to produce a standard of work that the actual client is after. You know what I mean? So knowing when I need to purchase equipment, but also knowing when I can just go out there and rent equipment as well, because you don't always need to spend money on things when you don't see that you're going to be able to get your money back in the long term. Moving on to one of the reasons why I think you do need to upgrade equipment, and there was a reason why I really needed to upgrade equipment, was my redundancy. So important for me as a photographer who works in an industry that is always changing, but also in an industry where the photography only happens once. I'm working in wedding photography. These moments only happen once. And so if something were to go wrong, we can't just go back and stage it again. There's a fair few other industries that you work in where you are able to go back and stage things again, and that's totally fine. If you're working in other corporate photography, you can go back. If you do have a mistake on one day, you can go back and go do the same thing again the next day. But for me, redundancy is a big thing in making sure that I have enough equipment that if I'm there on the day and things break, that I've got another piece of equipment that can happen, because these things do happen, and equipment will break, and things will go wrong on the day. So if you don't have other equipment there, I think that's super important to be able to have other pieces of equipment. So that was one of the main reasons that I upgraded to having 2 cameras last year. I only had 1 camera, and then I was renting another camera body every time I had to go to a shoot, but it really isn't going to work out because I know that's a long-term investment that I need to make. And then so I went and bought another camera body in the last year, and that's when I upgraded to my full-frame camera, because I know that is something that I'm going to want to transition into over the next couple of years. So that was a good reason for me to upgrade to a full frame camera, because then the next camera I get's full frame and I can use all the lenses from that camera on the new one as well. So that would be really nice. And for me, I needed to know that I had 2 cameras, so that if I had one on the day and there was something that did go wrong, or anything could happen on the day, and so having another camera there is really nice. I think that's one of the big things about client work, is that a client will pay you to be able to manage that risk for them. There's always risk. Anything can go wrong on the day, especially in a high stress scenario like on a wedding day. Things can go wrong, and a lot of things will go wrong probably. The client or whoever is getting married has asked you to be there to be able to take on some of that risk. So you need to know that if something was to go wrong, how you can handle it. And if I was only to turn up to their wedding day with 1 camera and 1 lens and 1 SD card, for example, things can go wrong with that. And if I don't have anything else, everything's still unfolding in front of me. I can't just say to them, hang on a second, I've got to go out. I need to have one there on me. And that's why they're having me there. And that's why they're not just having their auntie who has an old school camera there to take the photos for them. They want someone that knows what they're trying to do. They want someone that knows that if something goes wrong, they can still manage that. So you need to make sure that you are having that risk on you. And I think that was one of the big things for me in being able to be a photographer and provide that service for them, that I know for myself, because I would never want to be in that position where if something went wrong that I wasn't able to answer that answer that issue, but also for them as well. I think that's why they have me there. And that's why they want someone there to be there on the day. So I have to know that I can have things. I can have a backup. I can have a backup if things do go wrong. Then the other big reason that I really want to speak on, and this is probably the last point that I'll make here today, but it was something that came up through the week for me, in that thinking that when it all becomes too stressful and when you start to lose confidence in your equipment, that is probably when you need to upgrade, because the stress that not having confidence in your equipment can bring can often decrease the amount of creativity that you can have. If you're too busy stressed about the equipment that you have and the equipment you have not working up to the full potential that you want it to and not being able to create the images that you really want it, sometimes it's better to just bite the bullet and be able to go and get that new piece of equipment, because it's not worth the stress. And in the long run, you'll probably produce a lot better imagery. And if you know an exact purpose and exact need that why you need that other piece of equipment, it's probably a worthwhile investment anyway. So for me, this happened last year where I was out taking photos. I was taking photos for a couple, and I came home and all the images were out of focus. They're all blurry, or it was about half of them were out of focus, half of them were blurry. But you wouldn't have realized if you just had a look through the back of the camera. They were only just slightly out of focus. And there was something about it that I just couldn't trust the camera to always be on focus. And I'd had it looked at, and there was just something wrong with it. So I knew that I needed to upgrade, because that stress for me, thinking that I could go out on one day and it could work good, but I could go out the next day and it could be all out of focus and I could get home and they're all bad. That's not a stress that I want to have. That's not a stress that I can be okay with. I could be okay if it would just happen randomly or happen once every now and again. But when it's half of my images, I can't really do a lot with that, and I'm not really comfortable being able to produce imagery like that. So I knew I had to go out and upgrade to a new camera. There's also been occasions where I was shooting a wedding in a really dark church where I knew I couldn't use flash, so I needed to upgrade equipment because I knew the camera that I had wasn't going to be able to perform to its best in that environment. The images were going to be either really grainy, or they were going to turn out really dark and out of focus, and I really wasn't going to be able to work. So I needed to upgrade some of my lenses there to be able to get lenses that could let in more light. And that was really a scenario where I knew that is going to be something that's going to happen a lot again and again. If I'm going into this industry, always working in those environments, that's going to be something that I really need to do. And so it's not worth the stress of me thinking, are these images going to turn out, rather than if there's an easy fix for that, I'm going to go out there and spend the money to make sure I get that fixed, because that is something that I know I'm going to come across again and again. I was speaking to another photographer a few weeks ago, actually, about some images they had from a drone shot that they wanted to get printed off, and they were actually using the drone that I've got. They were using the DJI Mini 2, and we were talking about how they could blow those images up and to be able to get them printed really large. And the issue with the DJI Mini 2 is that the actual sensor on the camera is only a 12 megapixel sensor, which means that you can't actually blow those images up really large. You could probably blow them up to about A2 size, if anyone knows what A2 size is. Blow them up to about that size, which is pretty big for an image, but you probably couldn't go past that without it being really grainy, without it being very blurry. Like if you're just going to hang that in your home, it's probably not going to look good at A1 or A0. So we were talking about what we could do about that, and there's not really a lot. You can do a lot on the computer. You can make images look larger than they actually are, enhance your resolution of an image, but you can't change the amount of detail that you've had in the original image. So this is a scenario where some older cameras only will have a small megapixel amount on the camera. So you can't blow those images up to very large. So if you're a landscape photographer out there who's working on an old camera, who's working on a smaller drone like I've got, you're never going to be able to blow those images up very large. So if that's an industry that you want to head into, you're probably going to need to upgrade. That is a certain reason that you need to upgrade your equipment in order to be able to produce that certain result. So if you ever get to that point, I think once you know the specific reason, that's a good time to upgrade, not just because the newest piece of equipment's out is that you need to upgrade. You definitely don't need to go and buy the brand newest equipment. But once you can identify an area where you need the next piece of equipment up for a certain specific reason, then I think that is a good time to go and get that piece of equipment. And this actually came up for me through the week because I got an inquiry to do an event towards the end of the year. And it was for a specific type of event where I knew I didn't have the equipment for that event. So I was thinking about it. Is this an area that I really want to go into? Yes, it probably is. I'm starting to do more event photography, more wedding photography. So this is probably something that I'm going to have to come across quite a bit. It's not something that I have done so much of yet, but I know it is going to be something that I'm going to do in the future. So I'm contemplating whether to get a new piece of equipment, a new lens specifically, so that I can take the types of photos that I know that they're going to want at this event. And for me, if I really sit down with that and think about the scenarios that I'm going to be using that over and over again, I know the specific purpose why I need it. I know that it's going to be something that I'm headed into. I've sort of worked in that industry before, so I know a little bit about it. I think it's a good decision to be able to upgrade equipment. That's why I really wanted to speak on it today, because I think too many people can be too impulsive in thinking that they need the next and best equipment. And as I've spoken about, and I hope I've really made clear today, you don't need the best equipment. You can start with the amount of equipment that you have. You can start with any equipment that you really have. Obviously, up to a certain point, though, if you want to be a photographer, you probably need to have a camera. But that being said, I started taking photos on my phone and I was editing them on my phone. So I knew a bit about editing before I'd even bought my first camera. So I was already starting to sort of play around there. If that was something that you really wanted to do, then you would hopefully be out there experimenting a little bit with the things that you've got and hopefully trying to grow as you can. For me, I've always been wanting to grow my equipment as I grow my business, and using work that I've booked in the future to be able to pay for equipment that I now have, be able to pay for equipment for that work. I think there's no point having a great amount of equipment if you don't have any clients, if you don't have any work booked in, if you've got no one who's interested in your work, then you probably got to go back and produce good work. You probably got to go out there and get clients. You probably got to go and talk to people to be able to get work booked in, and then use the deposits, use the retainers from that work to buy the equipment for that work. And that's the best way. If you can show that you can do something with the equipment you've got, people will trust you enough. And then if you feel that you need to upgrade when you get there, then you have the amount of money to be able to go do that and use that in money to reinvest in your business. You don't need to have that upfront money. You don't need to start with the most amazing equipment. You can start with anything. And I think that is the most important point that I can make here today. And so with that being said, I think that is where I'm going to end today's episode, guys. I hope you really did enjoy this one. I hope you gained a little bit from it. I know it got a bit technical there for a little bit, but I think there are a lot of photographers out there who are starting to listen to this podcast, and I'm really enjoying all the messages that I've been really receiving from you guys, and I hope that you're really enjoying it and you enjoyed hearing a bit about my process and about my equipment a little bit as well, and hearing about the things that I think are important and that are not often spoken about enough, in that you don't need the next best equipment, and you really need to be able to know for yourself when you need to upgrade equipment, because there are certain situations out there where you do need to have upgraded equipment, and it would be wrong for you to not upgrade equipment. So hopefully you learn a little bit about that today. And if you did enjoy today's episode, guys, I would really appreciate it if you did share this episode around with a friend, share it around with someone who you think would also appreciate this episode. Share it around with someone who is also in a creative industry who could actually learn something from this. I think this episode could be really helpful for someone talking about equipment. I think anyone starting out there often stresses too much about equipment. So being able to share this with someone who would really benefit from that, share it with someone who is starting out in any type of creative field, I think it could be really helpful for them. And if you're over there watching the video version of this podcast on YouTube, thank you very much for tuning in. And I would really much appreciate it if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's a free way that you can help out this podcast and help to grow this podcast and be able to get it out to a wider audience. So if you've been enjoying the podcast episodes, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel and hopefully have you guys back here every single week. So with that being said, guys, I hope you have a great week, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.